you could have been there with me. I just hate shopping alone. I can never decide what I want, so I just buy everything.
Before Black Barbie was serving corporate realness, before she was a doctor, an astronaut, a lawyer, a president, or anything else she could dream of being, Black television had already created its own version of Barbie. She was glamorous, she was feminine, she loved fashion, she loved beauty, she loved men, she loved money, and baby, she loved the finer things in life. I'm talking about the Black bougie Barbie. And if you grew up watching television in the 80s and 90s, you probably knew at least one. Sandra Clark from 227, Whitley Gilbert from A Different World, Hilary Banks from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Regine Hunter from Living Single. These women were glamorous, dramatic, fashionable, and sometimes, let's just say, a little bit much. They could be spoiled, they could be vain, they could be materialistic, they could be judgmental. And television often used those qualities to make us laugh. But here's what I find interesting. The same characteristics that made these women comedic stereotypes also made them incredibly important representations of Black femininity. Because Black women on television weren't always allowed to simply be girly. They weren't always allowed to be frivolous. They weren't always allowed to care about clothes, makeup, shopping, men, luxury, or status without having to justify themselves. And these women did. They wanted a good life, they wanted beautiful things, and they weren't ashamed of it. But there's another side to this, because the Black bougie Barbie can easily become the shallow woman, the dumb woman, the gold digger, the spoiled princess, the woman who cares more about her appearance than anything else. So today I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the complicated side of the Black bougie Barbie. Because maybe these women weren't just stereotypes. Maybe they were showing us another way to be a Black woman on television. First, let's define what I mean by a Black bougie Barbie. Because being bougie doesn't necessarily mean being rich. It's not simply about having money. It's about presentation, aspiration, taste, and attitude. It's the woman who wants the nice apartment, the designer outfit, the expensive restaurant, the perfect hair, the jewelry, the beautiful car, and maybe a man who can afford to keep up with it all. But the Black bougie Barbie is also deeply feminine. She isn't afraid of being pretty. She isn't afraid of being high maintenance. She isn't afraid of wanting to be spoiled. And she's not necessarily interested in proving that she can do everything herself. Sometimes she wants somebody else to do it. And honestly, that was a pretty radical thing to see. Because Black women have historically been subjected to stereotypes that emphasize strength, resilience, labor, and responsibility. The Black woman on television was often expected to be the one who had everything together. The mother, the caretaker, the responsible friend, the strong woman. And those representations matter. But what happens when a Black woman doesn't want to be responsible? What happens when she wants to be pampered? What happens when she wants to spend an afternoon shopping? What happens when her biggest problem is that her outfit doesn't look right? That's where the bougie Barbie comes in. Let's start with one of the earliest examples, Sandra Clark from 227. Sandra is important because she gives us something slightly different from the women who come later. Sandra isn't necessarily the wealthy socialite. She's the aspirational Barbie. Whitley was born into wealth. Hilary grew up surrounded by wealth. Sandra was going to manifest the lifestyle. She might be living in the same neighborhood as everybody else, but in her mind, she's somewhere much more glamorous. Sandra is obsessed with her appearance, her clothes, her hair, her beauty, her desirability, and of course, men. Sandra wants to be seen as glamorous, and she doesn't apologize for it. That's what makes her so funny. Sandra genuinely believes that she is fabulous. Not potentially fabulous, not someday fabulous. She is already fabulous. And that confidence is a huge part of her character. She's basically saying, I may not have everything I want yet, but I'm going to look like I do. And honestly, that's bougie. Sandra represents the idea that bougie isn't always about your bank account. Sometimes it's about your mindset. It's about aspiration. It's about wanting more. It's about believing you belong in spaces that you may not have access to yet. And that's something we can actually see throughout Black popular culture. The desire for the finer things isn't necessarily about being shallow. Sometimes it's about imagining a different life. But Sandra also introduces one of the biggest stereotypes attached to this archetype. She's often funny because she's vain. She's focused on beauty. She's focused on men. She's focused on appearances. And that leads to a familiar cultural assumption. If she's beautiful and obsessed with fashion, she must be dumb. That's something we're going to see again and again. Then we get to Whitley Gilbert from a different world. And Whitley is the definition of born bougie. Whitley comes from money. She grew up with privilege. She has expensive taste. She's accustomed to a certain lifestyle. And she absolutely expects the world to understand that. Whitley is glamorous. She's feminine. She's intelligent. She's ambitious. And she's incredibly spoiled. And I think that's what makes Whitley so interesting. Because she isn't simply a nice rich girl. She's complicated. She can be elitist. She can be judgmental. She can look down on people. And sometimes she genuinely believes she's better than everybody else. That's the downside of the bougie Barbie. Because there is a point where enjoying luxury becomes classism. There's a difference between saying I like nice things versus saying people who don't have nice things are beneath me. And Whitley eventually learned that difference. One of the reasons her character works so well is because she actually grows. She gets humbled. She experienced emotional pain. She experiences financial struggles. She has to confront her own insecurities. And her relationship with Dwayne Wayne challenges the image she has created for herself. Dwayne doesn't simply fall in love with the glamorous Whitley. He also sees the vulnerable woman underneath all of that. And that's important because the best thing about these characters is when the show reminds us the Barbie has a human being inside her. Now let's talk about one of the most recognizable Black bougie Barbies of all time, Hilary Banks. Hilary is almost like Barbie herself got dropped off in Bel-Air. She has the clothes, she has the mansion, she has the hair, she has the accessories, she has the attitude, and she has absolutely no problem spending money, preferably her daddy's money. Hilary's entire aesthetic screams, I have somewhere to be, even when she doesn't. She's obsessed with fashion, she's obsessed with beauty, she's obsessed with social status, and she's obsessed with being fabulous. But Hilary also embodies one of the most common stereotypes of the glamorous woman, the dumb beauty. She's frequently portrayed as clueless, she's often disconnected from what's happening around her, and her lack of interest in academics becomes part of the joke. But here's the thing. I don't think Hilary is actually stupid. I think she's socially intelligent. Hilary understands image, she understands branding, she understands celebrity, she understands how people perceive her, and eventually she becomes professionally ambitious. She develops a career in television, she becomes a public personality, she figures out how to turn her image into something valuable, and when you look at that through a modern lens, Hilary was basically an influencer before influencers existed. She would have had a YouTube channel, a podcast, a skincare line, a fashion brand, and a sponsored post every other day. Hilary knew the power of presentation, and that is a form of intelligence. But television often tells us that if a woman cares about presentation, she doesn't have anything going on upstairs. And I think that's where Hilary becomes more interesting than the stereotype. She gets to be silly, she gets to be spoiled, she gets to be vain, but she's still a person. And then we have Rejine Hunter. Rejine is where the Black bougie Barbie becomes even more sophisticated. Because Rejine doesn't just want money, she has standards. She wants a certain lifestyle. She wants a certain kind of man. She wants beautiful things, and she has absolutely no intentions of pretending otherwise. Rejine is fashionable, ambitious, confident, and extremely aware of her own worth. But here's the important thing. Rejine isn't simply waiting for a man to rescue her. She has her own ambitions, her own personality, her own friendships, her own goals, and that complicates the gold digger stereotype. Because society often assumes that if a woman wants a wealthy man, she must have nothing else to offer. But why can't a woman want both? Why can't she have a career and want to be spoiled? Why can't she be financially independent and still want a man who makes more money? Why can't she be ambitious and still love designer clothing? Regine doesn't see these things as contradictions, and I think that's a part of what makes her so modern. She basically says, I can take care of myself, but if you're offering to make my life even better, I'm listening. And there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting a comfortable life. The problem is when a character is reduced to that desire. And Regine is much more than what she wants materially. She's funny, she's loyal, she's ambitious, she's insecure, she's romantic, she's sometimes selfish, she's sometimes ridiculous, she's human. Now we have to talk about the word that gets thrown around whenever women like these appear. Gold digger. The woman who wants money, the woman who wants a rich husband, the woman who likes expensive gifts, the woman who doesn't want to struggle. And this stereotype can be particularly harsh towards women because we don't always judge men and women by the same standards. A wealthy man dating a beautiful woman, he's successful. A beautiful woman dating a wealthy man, she's a gold digger. A man wanting a beautiful partner, that's normal. A woman wanting a financially successful partner, suddenly we're questioning her character. Now, obviously there are people who genuinely use relationships for money. That happens. But wanting financial security isn't automatically immoral. Wanting a partner who is financially stable isn't automatically shallow. And enjoying luxury doesn't mean you don't have emotional depth. That's where these characters are useful, because Sandra, Whitley, Hilary, and Regine all have materialistic tendencies. But they're also more than those tendencies, and that's the distinction. The idea that the more feminine a woman is, the less intelligent she must be, we've seen this archetype forever. The dumb blonde, the ditzy cheerleader, the trophy wife, the socialite, the pretty girl who doesn't understand what's happening. And black women weren't immune to that stereotype. Characters like Hilary and Sandra could become comedic because their interests were considered frivolous. But here's the thing. Fashion is an industry. Beauty is an industry. Entertainment is an industry. Social networking is a skill. Understanding how people perceive you is a skill. Knowing how to present yourself is a skill. And these women understood those things. They may not always prioritize them in a way the audience expects, but that doesn't make them unintelligent. And I think there's something particularly interesting about this when we're talking about black women, because black women have historically had to fight to be recognized as feminine. We've been told we're too loud, we're too strong, too aggressive, too masculine, too much, blah, blah, blah. So when black television gave us women who were hyper feminine, it was significant. These women were saying, I can be soft, I can be pretty, I can care about fashion, I can want romance, I can want luxury. And none of that makes me less of a person. But there is one criticism of Black Bougie Barbie that I can think is completely fair. Classism. Sometimes the desire to be wealthy becomes the desire to separate yourself from people who aren't. And Whitley is probably the strongest example of this. She comes from privilege. She understands that privilege gives her access to things other people don't have. And early in the show, she doesn't always have much empathy for people outside of her social class. That's a flaw. And it's important to acknowledge it, because representation doesn't mean every character has to be a role model. Sometimes representation means allowing a character to be flawed. Whitley isn't interesting because she's perfect. She's interesting because she changes. Sandra isn't interesting because she's always practical. She's interesting because she lives inside her own fantasy. Hilary isn't interesting because she's always responsible. She's interesting because she's ridiculous. Regine isn't interesting because she has no materialistic tendencies. She's interesting because she owns them. And that's the difference between a stereotype and a character. A stereotype has one trait, a character has contradictions. I think this is probably the biggest takeaway for me. Black women deserve to be frivolous. And I don't mean that we should aspire to be shallow. I mean that not every aspect of black womanhood has to be about survival. Sometimes you want to look cute. Sometimes you want to go shopping. Sometimes you want to spend too much money on something you absolutely don't need. Sometimes you want to be spoiled. Sometimes you want a man to open a door. Sometimes you want to wear 6-inch heels for absolutely no reason. Sometimes you just want to be pretty. And there's nothing wrong with that. Black women don't always have to be the strongest person in the room. We don't always have to be the most responsible. We don't always have to be the caretaker. We can be messy, we can be dramatic, we can be selfish, we can be spoiled, we can make mistakes, we can change. And that's what these characters gave us. The black bougie Barbie didn't disappear. She evolved. Today we have something that they call the soft life aesthetic. Luxury, travel, beauty, self-care, pretty homes, nice clothes, protecting your peace, wanting a partner who can provide, and refusing to romanticize struggle. Sound familiar? It's basically the modern version of the same fantasy. But now we're having a much bigger conversation about it. Is it empowerment? Is it consumerism? Is it feminism? Is it traditional femininity? Is it unrealistic? And I don't think there's one universal answer, because the desire for luxury isn't inherently bad, and the desire to live comfortably isn't inherently shallow. The real question is, what else is there? If all you have is the designer bag, then yes, maybe that's a problem. But if you have the designer bag, the career, the education, the friendships, the personality, the emotional intelligence, the ambition, then maybe the bag is just a bag. And that's where the black bougie Barbie becomes more than a stereotype. So let's go back to our 4 women. Sandra Clark, the aspirational Barbie, she may not have the lifestyle yet, but she is absolutely committed to the aesthetic. Whitley Gilbert, the princess, born into privilege, forced to confront the limitations of the world she thought she understood. Hilary Banks, the socialite, fashionable, dramatic, sometimes clueless, but much more capable than people give her credit for. And Regine Hunter, the city girl, independent, ambitious, glamorous, and unapologetic about wanting the finer things. 4 different women, 4 different versions of the same fantasy. And that's what I love about looking back at these characters. They weren't perfect. Some of their storylines absolutely leaned into stereotypes. Sometimes their materialism was the joke. Sometimes their femininity was the joke. Sometimes their intelligence was the joke. But they also represented something valuable. They represented black women being allowed to participate in a fantasy of beauty, wealth, femininity, and luxury. Maybe the most interesting thing about these women isn't that they wanted to be a Barbie. Maybe it's that they proved black women could occupy the fantasy too. Sandra wanted the lifestyle, Whitley was born into it, Hilary lived in it, Regine chased it, but none of them were just the clothes they wore. They were daughters, friends, romantic partners, career women, dreamers. They were sometimes selfish, sometimes insecure, sometimes shallow, sometimes absolutely hilarious. And sometimes they were wrong. But that's the point, because real women are contradictory. A woman can love luxury and still be intelligent. She can be feminine and still be ambitious. She can want a provider and still be independent. She can care about her appearance and still have depth. She can be spoiled and still have a good heart. She can be a Barbie and still be a whole person. And maybe that's the real legacy of the black bougie Barbie. She wasn't just telling us, look at my clothes. She was telling us, look at the life I believe I deserve. And for black women who weren't always represented in spaces of wealth, glamour, femininity, and luxury, that fantasy mattered. Because sometimes representation isn't about showing a perfect person. Sometimes it's about showing someone who says, I want more, I want beautiful things, I want love, I want comfort, I want to be soft, I want to be seen. And I don't have to apologize for wanting any of it. So maybe before Black Barbie had the dream house, Sandra, Whitley, Hilary, and Regine were already trying to decorate it. And honestly, they had the outfits ready, okay? So tell me in the comments, who else belongs in a Black Bougie Barbie Hall of Fame? Was there any black TV characters from the 80s or 90s who was serving luxury attitude and expensive taste? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.